Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. And as Madison has put in the chat, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. You can put your name and your pronouns if you would like, where you're joining us from, any information that would help us to know you better. So we'll be getting started in just a moment as more people arrive. Welcome to those of you who have just joined us. We are inviting you to introduce yourself in the chat, and we'll be getting started momentarily. It's really great to see so many people joining from across this country. We'll just wait another minute before we get started. All right, welcome everyone. Welcome to the Roots of Extractivism and the Moral Call for Transformation webinar. We're really delighted to have you. My name is Kirsten DeMello, and I am the Climate Advocacy and Education Coordinator for Mennonite Central Committee, US. Thank you again for introducing yourself in the chat. We appreciate that. Love to see where everybody is coming from. I'd like to thank the sponsors for this webinar tonight, the Coalition to Dismantle the Doctrine of Discovery, the Sisters of Mercy, Mennonite Central Committee, the Maryknoll Office for Global Concerns, and Creation Justice Ministries. We are especially grateful to our speakers who are sharing their time and their wisdom with us. We will begin shortly with a prayer, and then after the opening prayer, we will invite Sarah Augustine, Pueblo Tewa descendant and co-founder and executive director of the Coalition to Dismantle the Doctrine of Discovery, to give an overview of the Doctrine of Discovery and the work to undo its harm. From there, Ryan Juskus, assistant professor at the Institute for Social Concerns at Notre Dame, will join us to discuss our entanglement in and complicity with extractivism. And lastly, we will end our time together highlighting alternatives to extractives. In terms of webinar housekeeping, this webinar is being recorded, and we will make sure that those who registered will receive the recording. Secondly, because this is a webinar, we are unable to see see the participants. We're unable to see you. If you have a question, please use the Q&A function that's on the bottom of your screen so we can keep track of the questions throughout the presentation. We will have 2 times for Q&A and discussion. The first time will be after Sarah's presentation. And then at the very end, after we've heard the alternatives to extractivism short presentations, we will then have some Q&A and discussion. So we thank you for taking the time to join us this evening, and we honor whatever you may be bringing into this space tonight, and however you're showing up. You are welcome here. And we are going to begin with a prayer. I'm going to share a land acknowledgement that comes from the Evangelical Lutherans, and then I'm going to ask Sarah Augustine to also lead us in a prayer. So let's take a moment and if you can, put your feet on the ground and just settle into this space where you are. And if you feel comfortable, you can close your eyes. We are gathered together in this virtual place from all parts of Turtle Island, connected by technology, faith, a common sense of purpose, the breath given us by the breath maker who has named and called us here, and the very peace of Mother Earth, the land that each of us inhabits today. We also understand that all land is indigenous land, and I invite each of you to name in the chat feature, the indigenous peoples or tribal nations who were the first to love, pray, grow, celebrate, cry, drum, and sing upon the lands and places where you are located now. We know that indigenous peoples are not historical subjects, but part of our communities, churches, schools, and leadership, and that they offer invaluable knowledge for how we exist today and into the future in relationship with Mother Earth and our human and non-human neighbors. And now I invite Sarah to open us with a prayer.
Good evening, everyone. What a pleasure it is to be here with you. And the prayer I want to share with you was shared with me by a Nez Perce woman. It's really quite a simple prayer, and it's something that I have incorporated into my daily spiritual practice. And I want to ask you to consider doing the same. Creator, thank you for this land, our body. We'll say it again. Thank you for this land, our body. I think this prayer is so important because it doesn't talk about how the land is our bounty. It talks about how it is the substance of what we are and how intrinsically we are a part of it. When I pray this prayer in the morning, I acknowledge all the beings that surround me, the grasses and the shrubs and the trees and all the green things growing, what I've been taught to call the standing green nation, and acknowledging that we are actually all of us in community together and the life support systems that bind us to each other. Thank you for this land, our body.
Thank you, Sarah. Now I actually turn it right back over to you, Sarah, to start off our webinar together with your presentation.
Terrific. Well, let's talk about what the doctrine of discovery is. this is something in the coalition that we spend a fair amount of time talking about, because I think there's some kind of uneven understanding of what it is. So I want to tell you what it is actually. The doctrine of discovery is a body of law and policy that was adopted into our legal framework in the United States by the Supreme Court in 1823. So I'm going to say that again. The doctrine of discovery is a body of law and policy that was adopted into our legal system more than 200 years ago. So it is not a law. It is a paradigm for making law, which is to say there are hundreds of laws, maybe more, based upon the doctrine of discovery. So if you're curious about, well, what is a legal paradigm? What is a legal doctrine? It's called the doctrine of discovery, after all. Here's one that you may have heard of, and that is segregation. Segregation is not one law in this country. It was a body of law and policy with a specific intention. And that body of law and policy created laws that cut across every institution in the United States. So the health system, the criminal justice system, the housing system, the transportation system, laws about segregation cut through all of those things. So using just segregation as an example of a legal doctrine you may be familiar with. Well, the doctrine of discovery actually gets its name doctrine because it is a legal doctrine. It's a legal doctrine in the United States that forms policy today. So how did I learn about this thing that seems so obscure? What a difficult name that it has. Many people told me, you need to simplify that thing. It's like, wow, yeah, if only, well, it didn't exist at all, but I wasn't the one who named it. Actually, our Supreme Court did that. And so our Supreme Court continues to make decisions based on the doctrine of discovery. So what is it? What does this paradigm say? It actually explains who has the right to own and control land. And it doesn't just explain that for the United States. It's actually a body of law and policy that is across the world, the discovered world, that is. So let me put that another way. As Europeans developed the technology to navigate oceans, they needed a body of policy, and this was created by the Holy Roman Empire at the time, to determine who would be allowed to control what territory. And so the discovery doctrine is a doctrine that says that the first Christian monarch, which means the first European monarch to arrive in a territory, has absolute title and control of that place. They have absolute sovereignty of that place. So in the United States, that first sovereignty came to a European power, Spain, and then later it transferred to a different power, which would be the United States after the Revolutionary War. But I want to be really clear about this because the doctrine of discovery was created by an international system of both monarchy that depended on both monarchy and a global church body. The Holy Roman Empire. But the United States, who had no quarter with either of those, neither a monarchy nor a national church structure, still wanted to have that sovereignty, ultimate authority and sovereignty flow to them, the United States. And so that is, in fact, what has happened. So the doctrine of discovery has determined that all land, all native land, to be specific, all indigenous land, would be under the sovereignty of the nation. And I want to be really clear about this. All indigenous territories then are subordinate to that federal government. So I learned this overseas when I was working in Suriname, South America. And I learned that the indigenous people there who were being poisoned, their lands contaminated by mining, gold mining. That is to say that mercury is being used to extract alluvial gold, and then cyanide is being used in the pit mines. And so these territories are being contaminated with toxins that cause all kinds of neurological damage and all kinds of other health impacts. Have no ability to advocate for themselves under the law because all of their territory is owned by their federal government. And so, after going to every international body that I could find, including the United Nations Environmental Program, the international human rights courts, the human rights mechanisms at the UN level, NGOs like the America or like the International Red Cross, and all the actors you can think of, the World Health Organization. After going through these various entities, I learned that this extraction without the consent of indigenous peoples is perfectly legal in a system that was created for the descendants of those who settled or colonized the place. And so that was really shocking for me to understand. And then I was able to apply that knowledge and understanding to my own story as an Indigenous woman here in North America, and began to learn the story of how the lands of my people have been taken away by first by all of the policy areas of the United States that have been designed to remove indigenous peoples from their lands, but finally by the executive order in the 1940s that made Los Alamos and took much of our lands away so that the US government could create the atom bomb and test it actually on the lands and waters of my specific people. So the doctrine of discovery is still at play right now as the United States is transitioning to what we call a green transition. And there is a huge market boom for electric vehicles. We continue to extract on indigenous people's lands, lithium and copper and the other resources needed to create electric vehicles. And indigenous peoples do not have the ability to stop that process from happening, because ultimately we are called dependent states to the federal government, which has the absolute authority over all indigenous territories. So I'm going to take a breath there and stop for Q&A. Kirsten, I think that's the plan.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Sarah, for just um, giving us that overview of what the doctrine of discovery is, how it is impacting Indigenous people even today, and how that connects with extraction. So we want to open this time up for your questions. Yes, it is good to pause and to think. Thank you, Michelle. And let's see, we have one right now. So one question has come through: is this doctrine enshrined in international law?
It
And
is
where can
enshrined.
I find it?
It is enshrined in international law. And in fact, terra nullius, which is a primary feature of the doctrine of discovery, terra nullius is a legal statute that says, or a legal principle that says, if there is no European monarch there, then the land is empty of human habitation. So terra nullius is, please look this up and Google it. It is a feature of UN states to form their charter, so they can use that terra nullius as a feature to demonstrate their borders, right? So that in colonial states, terra nullius is considered to be a valid claim for saying these are our borders. We the people who have absolute title as a feature of the doctrine of discovery. So that's built into the UN Charter, which is why states like Palestine don't have sovereignty, right? They're not acknowledged by the United Nations system. And an important thing to understand about the United Nations is that system is designed as a place for states to come together. And by that, I mean national states to come together and to negotiate. It's not designed to be a system for communities to challenge the status of those states.
I'm wondering, Sarah, if you can speak about the connection with the church. So there is a question about, didn't the doctrine of discovery come from 1452 through the Vatican by a papal bull? So could you just kind of lay that picture for us, paint that picture for us about the involvement of the church?
Sure, it wasn't a papal bull. It was a series of papal bulls that were written by the Holy Roman Empire, the first arbiter of international law. So that church wrote this body of policy across many decades of time to sort of mediate the settlement of the world when the technology became available to do that. But the point that I would like to make and emphasize, because we could go on and on about this, is that the primary beneficiaries are Christians to this day, because Christians were the settlers. Do you see? So those people who were already living in those lands were not the beneficiaries of the doctrine of discovery. The beneficiaries were the descendants, those people who were subjects of monarchs that came from Europe and their descendants. And that is true today because the doctrine of discovery is baked into our legal system. So in the coalition to dismantle the doctrine of discovery, we recruit and train and accompany Christians and Christian descended people as the primary beneficiaries of the doctrine of discovery to join us in the civil rights movement to dismantle these systems of oppression.
Is there any kind of value or meaning to the visit that Pope Francis made to Canada? And this, I think, was several years ago, where he repudiated the doctrine of discovery. Uh, how do we make sense of that in terms of really undoing and dismantling this doctrine?
Yeah, so I think the confusion here, Kirsten, is this idea that it is a religious doctrine that could be dismantled. It's a legal doctrine. And in the United States, we have the separation of church and state. So it doesn't matter who the religious leader is and what their opinion is. That does nothing to ameliorate laws that are currently in play that define reality, not only for Indigenous peoples, but for settlers as well, that advantage settlers on the basis of not just religion, but really European descent. And so to put that a little more specifically, those people who are the descendants of the settlers have had the opportunity over generations to accumulate wealth at the expense of Indigenous peoples because the land that they settled on displaced Indigenous peoples. And so these are the primary beneficiaries, landowners in the United States, including people, this is most middle class people who have a home are benefiting from accumulated wealth that my people have been removed from. And so this is when Pope Francis comes and says, I want to stand in solidarity with Indigenous people, that's a wonderful thing. And the way to make sense of it is to say, here is a religious leader that is ready to publicly announce standing collectively with people who have been displaced and oppressed. But it does nothing to functionally change a legal system that is embedded in international law, in Canadian law, and in the law in the United States. So our coalition to dismantle the doctrine of discovery has a 100-year vision. We know it's going to take us multiple generations to actually reverse the doctrine of discovery as a legal structure. And our strategy is to do that the way that other embedded legal structures, like that structure of slavery, the way we reverse that, which is with a constitutional amendment. And we know we're not going to do that quickly, but we're organizing now to prepare the way for the ones that will come after us. And we have a multi-generational strategy to prepare those people who will be the next generation, and then the one following that we hope we will actually see a constitutional amendment.
And can you say a little bit more about that? There's a question in the Q&A about someone wanting to learn more about the Christian colonial paradigm and how that's being challenged by your group. So really seeking that constitutional amendment, but are there other avenues that you all have strategized about for that deconstruction and for reform?
I would love to just invite you I can do my best to make a sound bite, but I wrote a book called The Land Is Not Empty. I would really love to invite people to check that out. And so it's not my ambition to sell books. If you can't afford it, you can drop us a line. I'd be happy to send one to you. And that kind of is the full the download of our part of what we're doing. What we do is we work with ordinary Christians wherever you are, whatever community that you're a part of, to begin this process of supporting Indigenous movements for self-determination wherever you are. And so we work in a lot of local, hyper-local campaigns and state campaigns. We've also worked in some national campaigns, but what we're really doing is working to change policy right where you are. So we do that at sort of the micro level in your individual community, at the meso level, at the state level, and then at the macro level, at the national level. And so we also work with partners across North America. We have a very strong network in Canada and also partners in Mexico. And so we are international as well as national. But we understand here in the United States, we are really working on dismantling a legal structure that is defining for the people here.
Yeah, and I just want to reaffirm that the two books that Sarah Augustine has written are gems, with a lot of information and ways to just to undo all sorts of paradigms that we've been just inherited over the years and adopted ourselves. So to really undo that, the land is not empty, and so that we and our children may live. So I highly recommend those to all of you if you haven't had a chance to look at them yet. Um, so there are still a couple more questions about this relationship with the church and the Pope in particular and the Vatican. It sounds like what you're saying that those standing in solidarity, making statements it's symbolic, it's meaningful. But could this new Pope, Pope Leo, be able to make any significant change? I think I would add, to this legal framework.
So one of the things that Pope Leo could do, and he's signaling he may be willing to do this, is the largest private landowner in the world, that is to say, not a state, is the Catholic Church. So the greatest thing the Catholic Church could do is to return those lands to Indigenous peoples. They own the most land that there is, and it's not just the Catholic Church. There are reservations here in the United States. Most Americans don't know that reservations are not owned by Indigenous people. They're owned by a lot of different parties. Indigenous people is not one of them. So, for example, there are Christian denominations who are the primary landowners on multiple Indian reservations in the United States. And so one thing the church can do that is very concrete and actionable is to return that land. I think that could have a huge impact on policy. But I think this idea that, the interesting story in the United States is that there has always been a separation of church and state. So even though the United States as a nation wanted to benefit from this allegiance between monarchs and the Catholic Church, it had no desire to replicate that in our system. So while it received the sovereignty, it doesn't have any kind of a mechanism for the church to intervene at a legal level, right? So now our legal system is arranged in such a way where, we have three bodies of government, and those are the mechanisms that can change the law. And there's not really much Pope Leo can do about that. However, a very concrete thing that could happen is the return of land to the control of Indigenous peoples. That is a concrete thing that could change policy drastically, especially as it pertains to extraction and extractive industry.
Thank you. And a recent example of that are the Franciscan Sisters of Perpetual Adoration, who did return their land to the indigenous group in that area that originally belonged to. We're going to move on now to the next speaker. Thank you so much, Sarah, for just laying that foundation and introducing us to some of the complexities of the doctrine of discovery. We will have more time at the end we'll be hearing again from Sarah, where she shares an example of how we can create an alternative to extractivism. And we'll have more time to ask her more questions. So at any time, put a question in the Q&A and we'll see how we can get to your questions. Right now, I would like to hand this over to Ryan, who will share more about the complicity of the church. Ryan.
Great. Thank you, Kirsten. And thank you, Sarah. And I'll say again, introduce myself, Ryan Juskus, and I am descended from European settlers and immigrants here and live in Indiana, traditional homeland and current homeland of the Potawatomi. I want to share just maybe two short stories to kind of get into what I'd like to focus on for a couple minutes here, stories of entanglement with extractivism, really to pick up on what Sarah mentioned with extractive industries and their impact. One is this was several decades ago now. When I was an undergraduate in college, I went to spend about 6 months to Peru, to the Amazon, to work with a Christian peace and justice organization. And one of the things that I noticed pretty early on was how beautiful the highway was. Beautifully paved, newly paved, um, uh, easy to get where I needed to go. And I was working with a team, and we went up and down this highway many times. And between the coast and the jungles, you go through the mountains. It's quite a long trip, so it's nice to have uh, a, a paved highway. Another thing I noticed during that time was a lot of yard signs, a lot of signs around free trade agreements between the U.S. and Peru that were being negotiated at that time. Um, and a lot of strong feelings around these free trade negotiations. And eventually, while I was there, I came to see that these were connected. I thought maybe the roads were being paved to bring development and try to address poverty and things like that in Peru and in the Amazon, but came to learn pretty quickly that that was not quite the case, that the roads were actually paved in order to more efficiently extract resources from the Peruvian Amazon, get them out to the coast so that they could be exported to China, to the U.S. Or elsewhere. And um, and it was the first time I realized that a lot of what I was seeing was actually the kind of the global market integration of the Peruvian Amazon. This place that had been a traditional home for since time immemorial for many indigenous communities and tribes was now being defined by global market forces. And several years later, on that very same highway, um, there was an effort to say no to this form of development and integration. And the president at the time, president of Peru, was trying to push through a kind of a set of legislative package that would really open up the Amazon to global extractive industries. And so indigenous communities organized from the jungle and shut down the highway. And they blocked the highway, blockaded it for several weeks until the president of Peru sent in the military to reopen the flow of resources because they needed to get the resources from the jungle out to the coast to continue to grow the economy of Peru. And they ended up massacring 33 people that day on that highway. And it was a wake-up call for me. And I saw that this was not unique to Peru, that this was happening elsewhere in the country, but also around Latin America, that it was also happening in South Africa um, and in the Philippines and in many other places I was coming to learn about. And I saw that my own life, my everyday life, the things I use, the things that I live with, the things I eat even, connect me directly to places like the Amazon in Peru, places where I will probably never really see people or know who is impacted by the things that I consume, eat, use, throw away. and that I'm globally connected in a system that I don't believe in because it creates damage, damages human beings, human creatures, and ecosystems and other kind of creatures as well. Fast forward to just a couple years ago, we have my wife and I, we have a child who developed a cancer. It's not a genetic cancer, it's an environmentally caused cancer, but they don't know much about it because we don't have research money to try to understand where cancer comes from, only money to build big machines to try to cure it. But thank God, because when I was sitting in the Children's Hospital in Philadelphia day after day for radiation and other sorts of meetings, um, these are some of the most artificial spaces I've ever been in. Heavy machinery, energy intensive machines, materially intensive machines, all to heal my son. Why do I tell the story? Thank God for those machines, and that he is okay and alive and with us today. But I tell the story because I think it illustrates that even when we do things that might be good, things to love the people in our lives, to love our children, to love our communities. We also participate in heavily energy intensive and material and resource intensive things that connect us to people all around the world, that we're deeply entangled and entrenched in systems that concentrate benefit in places like the Children's Hospital in Philadelphia by shifting costs onto other people in other places, many of whom I'll never see, meet, or even know about. I'm complicit in things that I believe are wrong because they reduce God's human and other kind creatures to disposable things for my benefit. In small ways, every day, I consent to this order of things. If our hope for building societies and a larger world beyond extractivism and beyond the doctrine of discovery is going to be genuine and realistic, I want to suggest that we need to begin with truth telling, hopeful honesty, or an honest hope. Otherwise, I think we risk succumbing to the temptation that Pope Francis once called the technocratic paradigm. To put it in my own words, I think the technocratic paradigm is this promise of a solution to our problems that does not require transformation. Promise of a solution that doesn't require transformation. Maybe it's a techno-scientific solution. Maybe it's a business and design solution. Maybe it's a policy solution. It's not that any of these are bad in and of themselves. I don't believe that's true. But when we turn to them for solutions without considering how they've also contributed to our sacrificial cost shifting economy, then we fall into the technocratic temptation to pursue quote unquote solutions that merely sustain the status quo. Things like now what many communities are calling green extractivism or eco-colonialism. If the technocratic paradigm is one kind of temptation, another type of temptation we face is sometimes called eco-piety. It's the temptation to extricate ourselves from damaging systems through individual behavioral changes without building alternative systems. Individual behavioral changes can help change our own imagination and are good in that sense, but they are at best an unrealistic and ineffective response to extractivism. At worst, alternative individual choices buy into a certain kind of story of salvation via consumption, like green consumption, more or less keeping intact the various systems and structures that perpetuate extractivism and the doctrine of discovery, as if buying a Tesla makes me part of the solution. And so I think the right place to begin is with honesty, yet hopeful truth, with honest yet hopeful truth telling about our own entanglement with cultural, social, economic, and political systems that harm God's creatures, both human and other kind. Honesty without hope falls into cynicism and resignation, squandering our ability to harness our power to take action for real change. I think it's a failure to recognize that the world as it is not the world as it could and should be. Yet hope without honesty is wishful thinking, succumbing to either the technocratic temptation or eco-piety. It's a failure to act wisely in the world as it is, as it defers our actions that could be taken, it defers actions that could be taken to realistically bring about the world as it could and should be. I think as Christians, we have strong reasons to be hopefully honest and honestly hopeful, because Christian hope is rooted in telling the truth about the world. It is God's beloved creation. When it strays from that truth, God loves it to death, making dead creatures fully alive. And God calls all creatures to bear witness to the renewal of all creation. This is hope anchored in truth. So let's take a few minutes to practice this hopeful honesty as a kind of spiritual practice. It's a spiritual practice of paying attention to things. I put things in quotes because the word thing is far more interesting than we often assume. Long before it meant object, thing had a much richer set of meanings. Thing first meant an assembly, a meeting, or a discussion. And then it kind of shifted to mean something more like the matter of concern that would be discussed at a public assembly. So I invite you to see a thing near you. Look around you where you are. I invite you to see a thing near you in these two senses. One as a gathering of materials, relationships, and meanings, but also a thing as a matter of concern, something worth gathering to discuss and deliberate about. So I'm going to lead us through a series of questions about a thing in your midst. You may not know the answers off the top of your head, but do your best to imagine what they might be. And then it would be even more meaningful if you spent a few minutes after this webinar doing some research online, perhaps, to see if you can learn more about more accurate answers to these questions. Let me start with a prayer. Lord of life, give me courage to be honest about the ways my life and the well-being of my community are entangled in things I believe are contrary to your purposes. Give me the imagination to bear witness to a better way, where my good and the good of my community grow together with the good of your many wonderful creatures, human and other kind, especially those most under threat. Anchor my hope, not in our willpower and our genius to fix what is broken, but in your gracious and transformative love that brings to life things that are bound by death. Amen. So I want to invite you to fix your eyes on something, or maybe even grab something around you, a thing, or maybe pick it up if it's within reach, and consider, what is it made of? Is it wood? Is it maybe some type of plastic or metallic? Is it food? Is it covered in some kind of paint or some other kind of shiny finish? Is it a mix of materials, maybe? Maybe you can't even tell what it's made out of. Where do you think these materials might have come from? Who lives there? Who are the human creatures who live there? What about the other kind of creatures? How might they have been affected by its extraction? You think it was received as a blessing, curse, maybe a mix of both? Who touched it? Who moved it? Or changed its form from its origin point to where you are right now? Who's been impacted by this work of moving and changing it, processing it, mixing it? How long will it be where it is now? What will happen to it when you're done with it, or it no longer serves its purpose? Where will it go then? How long will it be there? Who will it impact? Do things have to be this way? How could things be different? If you're like me, I suspect you probably had trouble answering some of these questions. We're not generally taught to ask them, and if we are, we don't usually think they have much spiritual significance. In fact, I think we're actively taught not to think about these sorts of questions, right? Electronics come from Best Buy, and my toothbrush comes from CVS. This can of tomato sauce comes from aisle 9. But when we ask questions like this, we slowly come to see ourselves, right, entangled in vast webs that connect us to people and places all over our region and all over our world, for better and for worse. And as soon as we start asking questions like this, we're met oftentimes with resistance. Maybe it's our own resistance. Maybe it's from someone else. How could you possibly get to work without a car? How could I possibly do my job without this laptop and the internet? How could you possibly cure your child's disease without powerful medical machines? How could we possibly grow the economy without producing at least some damage? How could you get the idea. And that's where the cynicism kicks in, right? We meet our own lack of imagination. We realize we have come to believe that our own life and healing and well-being, or in a word, salvation, is caught up in a vast system of sacrifice and shifting of costs onto other people in other places, in their environment, in their place, in their land. We struggle to imagine building communities or economies or healthcare or education on anything other than cost shifting sacrifice, their life for mine, their pollution for my sustainability. Have we accepted as natural that my life and the life of my family and the people I love must come at the expense of those people over there? Have we come to think it's just normal that our entire food system is built on fossil fuels, not only for moving them around the world, but also for the petrochemicals that go into our machines and our agrochemicals and also for the synthetic fertilizers? Have we come to think that it's inevitable that doing work and earning a wage or salary requires us to shift costs onto other people and places that I'll never meet? In short, have we come to embrace a particular kind of salvation story? One that says that my life and well-being and our lives and our well-being over here in my community are made possible by shifting social and environmental costs over there among those people in that place. Let me put it as clearly as possible. I think extractivism is like a theology of salvation. It promises us life, but only if we shift our costs onto those people over there. I put it that way because as Christians, we can name this and then recognize it as the lie that it is, right? My good and the good of my community are ultimately given to us by our Creator. While modern life is deeply embedded within systems of sacrificial cost shifting, this isn't the only way to be alive. I'm a realist, yeah, a hopeful one, but a realist nonetheless. Building a more just and generous society and more regenerative and mutually beneficial ecology is not something we can do on the timescale of an election cycle. Correct. It takes a 50-year vision or a 100-year vision, like what Sarah introduced. But that vision and the playful work to bring it into being need not start from scratch. There's a lot in history and in the experimental corners of our society that we can resonate with. Reinvigorating the commons, for instance, and finding shared commons between indigenous communities and Western and Christian communities who have their own versions of the commons. Becoming more intimate with our energy and food, building the power of communities to shape the conditions of their own living, working, playing, and eating. Recognizing the legal rights of rivers, lakes, other habitats. Praying outdoors, reading the Bible in sacrifice zones. Holding property in trusts like community land trusts. Building worker-owned businesses and economies. Requiring that things be made so that they could be repaired or circulated. Tuning our lives not to the gospel of extractivism, but to the gospel of abundance. Extractivism is not the only story of salvation in town. And I'll close with this. I'm inspired by my neighbors, the Pokagon Band of Potawatomi, who have reacquired land in southwest Michigan and begun this work of repair. When European farmers settled in the area and started practicing an extractive form of agriculture, they channelized the rivers, which means they straightened them out, including the Dowagiac River. Straightened rivers were part of remaking the land as a clean and neat grid system for extraction and industrial agriculture. Today, the Potawatomi are a decade into re-meandering the Dowagiac River. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ryan. Wow. Let's take another moment to just pause, take some deep breaths. That was so much, gave me so much to think about. These new terms to me, eco-piety and eco-colonialism. I think about my own desire to control something and at that individual level, how do I unentangle myself? But what would that look like at a collective and a systemic level, that disentangling, and what would be that alternative to an economy that's rooted in extractivism? I know that all of you have either experiences of those alternatives, even if it's small within a community or perhaps larger. We would love it if you could share in the chat just your ideas of what you have encountered in your own communities of alternatives to extractivism. And while you're doing that, we also are we're going to come back to Sarah Augustine, and she is going to share with us about this speaker series and how and some examples of how church communities, religious congregations have been able to give back to Indigenous people. So Sarah, let me hand it over to you.
Thank you, Kirsten. What we're really talking about here is economic justice. And economic justice requires some imagination, because the systems that we're living in now are not designed to be just. As I said in my comments earlier, the current legal and policy system that we're a part of was designed to advantage certain types of people at the expense of other types of people. And so in order for us to have a sustaining ecology, life ways that are human and that actually support what it means to be human, life ways that are consistent with the systems of life themselves, which is to say that encounter or consider all of creation. All of those things have to be imagined, because the systems that all of us inherited are not designed to do that. But I want to really put it at the core of this is economic justice, because the devastation that is happening as a result of extraction is done for profit. And so one of the commitments that I have made as an individual person is not to participate in systems of extraction, which is to say, just like all of you, I'm caught in the web that Ryan describes in so many parts of my life, but I'm not going to financially benefit from extraction or extractive industry. That's a commitment that I've made, that I am not going to financially benefit from the death and destruction of my people, which is to say Indigenous people, wherever they are in the world. I am not going to justify why my comfort or my economic security requires the death and disability and harm and displacement of my people and vulnerable people. And so when we think about systems and at a system-wide level, we have to imagine that we have to retrain our imagination around what security is. So in the United States, wealth accumulation is considered to be the thing that all of us do to be responsible adults. So did you all hear this? When you're growing up, hey, you have to take care of yourself. You have to do what you have to do to get ahead. Is that something that you've heard before? I mean, that's pretty commonly what we are taught as we're growing up. When we say what we have to do to get ahead, who are we getting ahead of? We're getting ahead of all those that are around us, right? Like we are poised to compete to make sure that we get our share. And this sort of philosophy of individualism, or religion really of individualism, is saying, I have to do what I have to do to care for myself and my family. And we make this a pious act because we say, well, I don't want to be dependent on anyone else. When in fact, our creation demonstrates to us that interdependence, mutual dependence is in fact what creation abounds with, and what we're created to be is interdependent, and a web of interlocking dependence among each other and interlocking obligation. So, for example, among my people, the Tewa people, I've been taught to give thanks every morning for breath, understanding that while I slept all night long and I didn't give thanks for it, the Creator was still there providing breath for me to breathe. And so that breath, I know, comes from, that oxygen is created by these amazing beings of trees, and that demonstrates the interdependence there. Actually, I'm not quite sure that trees need us. Maybe they do on some level, but we certainly need them. And so this idea that I can be independent, I don't need trees to breathe, I'm a rugged individualist, I can make it on my own. It's really absurd, isn't it? It's not possible. We are interdependent. We are interdependent beings, but we have created, or we have bought into, a philosophy and a religion that says to us that what we have to do to demonstrate our success and well-being is accumulate at the expense of others. And this is what Ryan was talking about too. So in the imaginative space that Ryan was talking about, my question is, what would it be like to acknowledge the reality of interdependence, which is economic justice? And so I want to start there, talking about alternatives. In our coalition to dismantle the doctrine of discovery, in our economic justice working group, we are beginning this process of imagining mutual aid, a system that is alternative to the current financial system, at least the current retirement system, where we are actually investing in each other's well-being instead of depending on the market to care about us. So every time, this is a rule of thumb for me, every time we're earning compound interest, that free money that we think we deserve, that compound interest is either coming from the land or it's coming from vulnerable peoples, the sacrifice of the land or the sacrifice of vulnerable peoples. So this assumption that we deserve that is really a strange idea. And so what would it be like if we invested in each other's well-being in a system of mutual aid instead of depending on these market forces and individual wealth accumulation? So we're trying to imagine that right now and build a structure for that. So I know very well that the structure that we're imagining and dreaming into existence and putting labor and capacity to build, that I'm not going to benefit from it. I'm 52 years old. This is a structure that may benefit Ryan's child and my child and people who are in their teens and 20s right now by the time they retire, right? We may be able to have invested in the system well enough of mutual aid that they're going to be able to benefit from that, which requires people my age and older to imagine paying into a system like that we'll never benefit from because we're paying it forward, right? We are paying into something that those that come after us are going to be able to improve and perfect and manage. That's different. But those of us who are alive now have an opportunity now. And what is that opportunity? We can actually take a look at the stocks that we have, those of us that are wealthy enough to have stocks and portfolios in the stock market. Many of us have 401ks or retirement plans in stocks. And so Kinnery Webb, who is a friend and sister and ally, wrote this little formula for us in the coalition so we could think about how much money at my household level am I really accumulating because of extractive industry. So Kinnery suggested that we would look in our own stock, take the time, it takes about an hour or two to figure out my own stock portfolio. I don't have one, but maybe you do. The S&P 500, it's a stock market index. It's where most people's investments are. And so what we can do is look at the S&P 500 and figure out which of those are invested in extractive industry. Some of us may have actually said, hey, you know what, I'm not going to invest in fossil fuels. And we've already taken those things out of our investment portfolio. But it turns out that about 2.6% of a fossil fuel free index still include mining companies that are doing extraction of minerals and rare earth. So it's not that difficult to calculate how much of our investments are in extractive industry. In fact, your stock portfolio manager, even your own statements should be able to tell you what you're invested in. And what you do is you just take a look at the yearly earnings of those specific stocks and look at that profit and determine how much of that should be shared with Indigenous peoples that are working for self-determination, and especially with land and water protectors that are working to preserve our home, this land, our body. Which of these land and water protectors could we support if we chose to say, hey, I'm not going to benefit from this extractive industry. I am going to set that money from my portfolio aside, understanding that it's wrong for me, it's unjust for me to benefit from that. So this is something we can do right now. And when we do that, where could we invest? That's a thing I want to talk to you about. And this is why I wanted to share with you our Indigenous Speaker Series in the coalition. This is where we called together Indigenous systems thinkers from across the world and asked them to help us imagine what an alternative system could be like. You know, how might we live if we didn't have as our primary motivation individual wealth accumulation, which is really the primary motivation of people in the dominant culture here in the United States. So these Indigenous leaders shared with us a vision for how they are accomplishing that in their own communities. And there are a couple of these I would encourage you to consider. One of them is Tewa Trode, who's of the Shinnecock Nation, and she and a women's collaborative are seeking to repair Shinnecock Bay, where 99% of life has been eradicated because the people of the Hamptons have refused for more than 50 years to install a sewer system. And so their solid waste is going into Shinnecock Bay and has pretty much killed all the life there. And so this women's collaborative, what they're doing is they're growing sugar kelp, and they're doing that as a means of restoring the ecology there, which also happens to be the center of their economy. So the center of the economy of the Shinnecock people is Shinnecock Bay, and they are doing this amazing restorative work to repopulate life there in the Bay. And so if you are able to take a look at the speaker series, you could consider investing in Tewa's Women's Collaborative. Another place for you to consider is the San Carlos Apache at Oak Flat, who are working to preserve Oak Flat, the sacred mountain that is being mined. The plan is to mine it with subduction mining for copper, the largest copper deposit in North America. And they are land and water protectors working to preserve that place for more than a decade. And you could join with them in that land and water protection in the Arizona desert. There are so many. You could also consider joining with us, the coalition to dismantle the doctrine of discovery in our land justice projects. If you were to go to our website and look at our land justice partners, you would also notice that there is also a formula there for how to imagine calculating economic gain based on private property ownership, and how to imagine and calculate based on the amount of wealth that you have, what is sort of a fair way of sharing that with Indigenous communities. And so these are some alternatives that I would like to encourage you to consider. First of all, imagining the economic justice is not investing in individual level wealth accumulation or insulating oneself from harm, but instead in working for economic justice as a collective. We have been hypnotized to believe that our well-being depends on us as individuals and our individual level actions. But I want to tell you that ecological survival is not going to happen because of individual level recycling. We're not going to turn back the clock on climate change because of our individual recycling efforts. We have to join together as a collective to work for policy change. And in the coalition, that's what we do. So first of all, imagining a world of economic justice. And that's a reframe in itself, to say, I have to center the well-being of the whole and not the center the well-being of myself, which is to say, thank you for this land, our body, not my body, not your body, our body, my body and yours, and all of us together, because we are intrinsically linked with all of these systems of life in creation. And extraction and the extractive industries in this world are destroying our ability as a species to remain a part of this creation. They're destroying our soil systems and water systems and air systems, those systems of life that we depend on. So first of all, we have to think about switching to our focus to economic justice as a collective. And then how do we partner with indigenous peoples who are already doing this work, those people already working for ecological restoration, those people that are already working collectively for land and water defense? How do we join indigenous peoples in those movements for solidarity, and especially those movements for whole systems change, which is to say the eradication of systems of death like the doctrine of discovery that are legal and policy structures meant to enrich the wealthy and mighty and dispossess the vulnerable. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. I want to lift up in the chat my friend and colleague in our Extractive Industries working group, who also works with the Coalition to Dismantle the Doctrine of Discovery, Do Hoyer, has been putting really essential links into the chat that connect you to a blog about investments in extraction, also about a calculator, the Honor Native Land Tax Calculator. So please just go into that chat and click on those links, pull them out of there, and set some time aside later to really dive into those. Also, the Indigenous Speaker Series that Sarah was speaking about, where you can find the story of the Women's Collective, the Shinnecock Women's Collective work, and the Shinnecock Bay. Yes, we will also pull out those links and send them to you in an email along with the recording of this webinar. So let's hear about another an example of another alternative, how we can build a circular economy in our own communities. And I'm going to turn it back to Ryan to introduce a very special video.
Great. Thank you so much. And I think, Sarah, that was a great segue, because when you think about divesting from things we do not believe in, or that are doing the sorts of harms that we want to change, there's a lot to say no to these days. And I ask myself, and I try to introduce my students as well to, well, what are the things that we can say yes to? And one of the ones that I've come across over the last couple of years is called the Industrial Commons, and which is a group. You'll see a video. It's about 7.5 minutes long, in Western North Carolina, rebuilding a manufacturing economy in Western North Carolina around cooperative principles based on human dignity and stewardship and care of the earth. And so you're going to see a little bit about them. It was founded by a woman named Molly Hemstreet, who's deeply shaped by Catholic social teaching and notions of solidarity and the common good, and the dignity of workers and the care of creation. And I was able to visit a couple of years ago with a group of Catholic investors who are building what they call raising capital for the commons. And there are lots of really great groups working in this space. So I want to just lift that up as an approach. And this, as the Industrial Commons is one example. They're rebuilding a diverse working class based on locally rooted wealth, which is the opposite of extractivism. So thank you for playing the video, Madison.
We knew we wanted to be rooted in this place. We're located in a really beautiful part of the world in the foothills of the Southern Appalachian Mountains. We've always been a manufacturing community. During its real heyday, Morganton was the place in the country and even in the world that produced some of the most amazing fibers and textiles and craft.
As we got into the 90s and the 2000s, a lot of companies started closing or they were sold out to outside ownership. We knew that manufacturing could be a pillar for our economy again if it was done differently.
And so we became really driven by this question. How do we build new economic models that can put communities and workers and this beautiful green planet of ours first? The Industrial Commons is really all about putting opportunity back into our community and to be able to undo those trends of generational extraction and generational poverty. Ultimately, what we are doing is finding models to root wealth locally.
We have 4 different fields in which we carry out our work: workforce development, business development, network development, and community engagement.
And the real innovation around the Industrial Commons is these 4 fields working together. In the workforce development field, we're working more with individual workers. In our Work and Work program, we're helping students make that leap from high school either into the workforce or a 2 or 4-year college opportunity.
You also want the goal to be measurable because you want to make sure you know you're making progress.
Our skilled training program can also provide opportunities for workers to have economic mobility and a pathway into a stable career.
I wanted to follow my passion, and I love a challenge.
Davon came to us through the industrial sewing program. He took the class and then literally walked over this little dividing line in the factory back there to join Rainy Pass.
A lot of stuff I do is repair sewing, and sometimes we get things that are so complex that creativity kind of sparks right there just in the middle of what you're doing. And I don't want to sound like cheesy, but it feels really good.
Repair is an important part of the circular economy, that when we buy high quality goods, if something happens to your jacket, you don't just put it in the trash or send it off, you get things fixed.
You've got to make sure that workers have both the hard and soft skills they need to be successful. But then businesses really need the resources and support to be successful as well.
In the field of business development, we are supporting businesses that we didn't start, but we are also doing that with the businesses we have started. For example, with Good Books, which is a bookkeeping company.
You'll just go to reports and then you can pull profit and loss.
And Material Return, which is really driving the future of the circular economy here in the region. We are also working with companies through what we call business transition.
It's not just handing things over, it's actually learning how to be an entrepreneur, how to understand the financials behind their books, understand how operations work.
The initial decision to co-op is kind of a grand vision, and the Industrial Commons offered us a scaffolding to work from.
Benefits for the workers are the opportunity to share in the company's profits, huge, and being able to establish the culture within your company, you know, who your team is, and the ability to really feel ownership within your company.
Post-transition, there's a lot more transparency, there's better benefit packages and forums for employees to come to us. Co-ops offer more control over what it is you're doing and how you do it and why you're doing it.
It's about rooting local wealth and creating the opportunity to keep jobs in rural communities in Appalachia.
Who's up for a little trouble?
We often talk about being big by being small together. So we're taking businesses and strategically putting them together in networks. One thing that has been key to driving our success is to integrate innovation and research into the companies that we support. And the Textile Innovation Engine is really focusing on several unsolved problems that are in the textile industry. One of those is this whole idea of circularity. And the innovation that is coming out of material return is a good example of that.
Material return is a solution for brands and manufacturers to recycle their textile waste and then turn it into new raw materials that help them make new products. And with the Industrial Commons, you've got a network of manufacturers that would love to start recycling, and they'd love to start using products made with recycled materials. We collect and we sort by fiber type. Sometimes we sort by color, just depends on what the end product needs to be. And then we spin it into new yarns. And then those yarns go back into the production process of either weaving, knitting, or product creation.
And that's really what the circular economy is, taking what we would normally call waste and making it into wealth for our communities.
With the Industrial Commons, as well as the Carolina Textile District, as well as the North Carolina Textile Engine, the main focus is to have a collaborative network of industry leaders and education facilities all working on the circularity and sustainability of the industry.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Ryan, for introducing that and sharing that with us. Just fascinating to imagine how that could, how our own communities could get involved in something like that. I would like to, as our final sort of panelist in this time of thinking of alternatives, I'd like to turn it over to Lisa Sullivan with the Maryknoll Office for Global Concerns. And she's just recently returned from a fascinating meeting, global group of international folks coming together to think about how to divest from extraction, at that global level. So Lisa, please share with us about that.
Thanks so much, Kirsten. And I'm looking to see where the share screen is, and I'm not seeing it right now. Oh boy, I did give I'm going to share just a few slides.
Yeah,
Madison, might you have that? It's disappeared from my screen.
No, I
Madison
will.
also
I'll try
has that.
to share that. Just give me a few
Okay,
minutes. You can
great.
keep
I
you
would
can start
much
talking
prefer
and
to
I'll get
see
it up there.
much prefer you to see some of the images. Indeed, as Kirsten is saying, I'm just returning a few weeks ago from a gathering from a network in the South America and Latin America, Central America, called Churches and Mining. And they just held a gathering of some 40 organizations to launch a platform for divestment from mining, really focused on how churches and faith groups can unentangle themselves, can not only unentangle themselves from this world of extractivism, but can actually contribute to the solution. There we go. Thank you so much, Madison. So what they've launched is something called the Platform for Divestment from Mining. You can go to the next one. And much as Sarah explained, so much of the motivation of deciding where we're able to put funds comes from the people themselves who are part of this mining, the people who've lost their lives. And this is a picture of some martyrs, perhaps some land and water martyrs. Chico Mendes, Berta Cáceres, who was actually a friend of mine, was killed in Honduras. Chico Mendes in the Amazon in Brazil, as well as Sister Dorothy Stang. And so they are really calling us to take a look at what is happening to communities. They've been there in the defense of communities and to honor their lives, to retake a look at how we are contributing to the loss of lives in communities. Next slide. And so, as we know, extractivism mining it brings to martyred communities, but also martyred ecosystems. And these are just two photos of that. One to the right, the Lake Titicaca. It's a Maryknoll sister who works with an Aymara leader, showing the incredible destruction of the Lake Titicaca waters, which has damaged so many children's health. and to the left, the destruction of the loss of life of over 250 people in Brazil when a tailings mine collapsed in Brazil. And so just that visual of what the damage of extractivism really means to people and to communities. Next slide. So much of this, the impetus for trying to connect money supporting mining companies and faith groups is that of Pope Francis's encyclical, which was called Laudato Si, and his whole concept of integral ecology, in which everything he insists is closely interrelated. Therefore, any investment in industries that cause death and devastation from mining can't be separated from local communities and their suffering. And so just we want to, this network tried to bring, how can we carry this forward? Next slide. And so just a few weeks ago, less than a month ago, a conference took place in Rome. It took place in Rome because the Vatican actually endorsed it. It was a conference to launch what's called the Platform for Divestment from Mining. And over 40 organizations were present. I was fortunate to be one of them, again, with support from the Vatican. Next slide. And the call was, how do we influence, or how do we look at the money that we're probably investing in mining, because all of us are at least part of some institution, be it a college, be it a church, be it with our retirement funds. In some ways, the money that we are benefiting from is coming from investment in mining. And so that's the leverage that we have to take that away, the leverage to take that away from the mining that is destroying communities. And so the call was to say no more money for mining and yes to life, especially taking into account indigenous communities. Next. And so specifically, this platform for divestment from mining is calling on religious and social organizations to withdraw their investments from the mining sector, to ensure that their finances are no longer complicit in human rights violations, ecological destruction, and the exploitation of indigenous communities in the global South. Next. And there's examples of how this is already happening. I won't read through this, but there's examples of communities, faith communities, Catholic, Protestant, in the US, in Europe, all over, specifically finding ways to take away their investments from specifically from mining. Next. And so the three things that this platform is offering is to help with information. So if you're part of a church, for example, to look at your investments to help find investment, how are they involved in mining? The second pillar is to help religious institutions audit their portfolios, right? To see what they may be part of. And the third is to insist that this must go with policy reform to protect vulnerable communities in affected areas. Next. And this is the final slide. Just that really interesting image of how we each can contribute through the organizations that we're part of to say no to the damages of extractivism, to mining, and to the destruction of communities and lives, and how we can say yes to community. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa, and we look forward to seeing how that process and movement just develops over time, and how our congregations can be part of that. We want to take this last just about 7 minutes or so and for more of your questions. I know that a lot of things have been bubbling in the chat, wonderful examples that you all have put in there about alternatives to this extractivist economy and ways that you see economic justice playing out in your own communities. Thank you for putting that in there. And thank you, Doe, also for continuing to share information in the chat. What additional questions do you have for Lisa, for Ryan, for Sarah? And I invite Ryan and Sarah to turn on your cameras so we can all be present here. And yes, please. ask your questions. I know there was one comment that came up in the chat that something that yeah, I often think about too. What do we do? Here we are, we're on Zoom, we're all using our laptops. We know that they're all coming from, the minerals extracted from various parts of the world, impacting people. What do we do with that knowledge and with that kind of level of entanglement?
So from my point of view, that is thinking rather small. Forgive me, please, the person who put that question in the chat. There is no individual action that we're going to take to change this. We have to work collectively at the policy level. And so if rare earth and extractives related to laptops is what you care about, then there are networks of people we can get together to really work on that at a policy level, because we are a collectivist society in spite of what we've been told. Our collective decisions are made in Congress, and we have the ability to challenge those things and to make other laws. The people who came before us are not smarter and more clever than we are. We have the ability to change reality through shaping policy. And not only can we do that, but we must do that. To practically answer your question, I think the video that Ryan shared is really important. I think the future of computers for all of us is recycling the components in old computers to create new ones. I think it's possible to imagine building cell phones and computers and all the tech from old tech. And that, I think it's just a matter of time to form collaboratives to do that. And I think we have to get out of this rut of saying, I want to be pious and pure in my personal consuming. Friends, you are not a consumer. That is not your identity. Your focus of the spirit in this world is not consuming products. You are an eternal spirit being, and you can use your life energy to change reality itself.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. And I would echo that and sort of add to it policy, but also what you could think of as maybe more broadly shared governance, which is part of what the industrial commons is looking at businesses as a kind of shared governance, right? Where the owners are the workers and share in the highs and the lows, right, of the organization. But also think about that in terms of wider governance structures as well. And this is where some of the indigenous movement in South America is pushing. It's just towards forms of shared governance, so that you don't just have two different models of development, one kind of economic growth versus something like a buen vivir, or different visions of more holistic growth, but actually growing kind of shared forms of governance where communities do have a real voice and ability to say no to certain kinds of development projects, but then also to constructively shape kind of alternative projects instead. So shared governance, I think, has a lot of potential.
Just want to add, I love, Ryan, when you said not only what we say no to, but what we say yes to. And I felt that so much in my many years in Latin America. And I think often we need to look to communities that are suffering, that are vulnerable, to find how we can say yes. For many of the past years, I was living in a small community in Venezuela, deeply affected by the food crisis. And so to see how that community organized itself, they had to survive. And so there's so many learnings that we have ourselves, and that what they did and how they learned to share and create different structures, led to a great happiness, I would say too. That often we're told, as Sarah was saying, that it's our individual happiness, but we're wired to need one another. And so just to find ways that we can look to different places where we're often not looking for the solution. So.
Thank you. Actually, we are just right now at 90 minutes, and I want to thank Sarah Augustine for joining us, Ryan Juskus for joining us, and Lisa Sullivan. Really appreciate all the wisdom that you brought and the so much experience in the ways that you've engaged this topic. And continue to look in the chat for different resources. We'll also be sending out an email with links to this. I also wanted to give a big thanks to Madison Mayhew with Creation Justice Ministries, who has been in the background this whole time, just making sure all the tech has worked smoothly. We're so grateful for you, Madison, and also for Doe Hoyer, who was part of the whole planning of this, and has been just showering the chat with so many wonderful resources. So thank you, Doe. And I also want to thank Marianne Comfort, who she works with the Sisters of Mercy, and she was instrumental in putting this webinar together. And she's not with us right now, but she'll be watching this later. And so we just want to say thank you. Thank you, Mary Ann. And thanks to all of you for joining and bringing all of your energy. I can tell this is such a passion for all of us here. So thank you for bringing all of that. And we're together in this. And yes, and we will be together again, I'm sure, in future times of interaction and engagement. Thanks so much. I just want to see if there are anything final words that Sarah, Ryan, Lisa, you would like to offer.
I want to thank you, Kirsten. You stepped in at the last minute so gracefully to moderate. So thank you. Thank you for that leadership.
My honor.
And that beautiful way in which you do that.
I would like to just invite you to join us in the coalition to dismantle the doctrine of discovery. We're ordinary people. We want you. We need you. Please join us.
Yeah, I want to thank all the organizers and also you, Lisa and Sarah and Kirsten, and for our ability just to open our imagination. Things don't have to be this way; they can be so much better and more joyful. And that the work itself can also be playful because we meet such great people on the journey. So keep going.
Wonderful. Thank you all, and I wish you all a wonderful afternoon and evening. Blessings.